All right, guys, so here's what's been making waves in the world of talk shows and political commentary. It's all about the heated exchange that went down on The View, featuring none other than the outspoken Stephen A. Smith.
You think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
To kick things off, he did the unexpected. Stephen A. found himself in the spotlight after pulling off what many are calling a verbal takedown against one of the panel's hosts, Sunny Hostin.
I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay? But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that.
That's less than 1% of the population.
I understand that,
but you know what?
And how did it all start? Well, the conversation was all about politics and societal issues. Topics we've seen time and again stir up some pretty fiery debates. So, what really happened? So, the stage was set, and the topic at hand was the perception of the Republican Party. Sunny Hostin, with her typically bold demeanor, suggested that Stephen A. might naturally align with her views simply because of shared racial identity.
You are the left, you leaned, and you were a prisoner to the extreme left in a lot of people's eyes. Well, guess what? Most of America doesn't operate on the fringes. Whether you're left or you're right, you're relatively centrist. You believe in compromise, negotiation, working with one another. Nobody gets to get everything they want. The problem is those on the fringes continuously push for you to get everything you want. They're not about getting things done. They're about getting their way. And if they're not going to get their way, they're about complaining and griping about it, because they understand that when you are operating based off of grievance, that's usually what provokes you to get to the polls. And that is why they don't mind feeling aggrieved and displaying and disseminating that kind of message, because they know people are going to gravitate to that. And as a result, that might get them to the polls, you thinking you're going to get what you want as a result of it.
Well, Stephen A. wasn't having any of it. He made it clear, saying in so many words that he doesn't see the Republicans as an extreme fringe. Instead, he acknowledged that both sides of the political spectrum might have extremes, but stressed how he identifies as fiscally conservative but socially liberal. Basically, he's all about reasonable taxes and letting people live as they choose, which I think is a perspective that resonates with many.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to what you said about Black men being very comfortable with matriarchy. And I agree with that because, Black households are often led by a grandmother, Black grandmother or Black mother. However, 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think that economically, they were looking at things. First of all, in this country, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, Colombians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you talk to the Hispanic community, depending on who you're talking to, they think differently. The Cubans think differently than the Dominicans. The Dominicans think different than Colombians. To some, the economy was a priority. To some, believe it or not, it was the border. You had some folks within the Hispanic populace that were encouraging the borders to be closed.
Stephen A.'s points were about understanding differences on issues like transgender rights in sports. And he wasn't dismissive of these issues. He suggested rather thoughtfully that we should first recognize why some people are cautious. Does this make sense? Emphasizing the basics. Stephen A. pointed out the misunderstanding people might have about complex issues, especially when misinformation is rampant. He highlighted that not everyone spends their days consuming news media, and many Americans are just trying to make ends meet. His argument was, why is it fair to expect everyone to be on top of every political nuance when they're just trying to get through their day? Imagine you've got your daily grind and you're sitting in traffic, just not really having the luxury to pore over every news piece, right? That's a pretty relatable scenario for a lot of us. So, Stephen A., with a real flair, made the case for sensible discourse and called for a separation of personal political bias from the reality of everyday life. Sunny's view. But let's not sidestep Sunny's input altogether. Her stance was somewhat accusatory toward less informed voters. She thinks people should tune into news more. She painted a picture of those who don't agree with her views as misinformed. Now, Sunny has often been noted for this elitist tone, sort of assuming that following the news religiously is the cure-all. See, here's the catch. Stephen A. managed to flip that narrative by pointing out the everyday concerns that most people face. He basically called out the disconnect that sometimes exists between media elites and the general public. And when you think about it, he wasn't wrong. A racial component? The discussion took another turn when Sunny raised the touchy subject of racial voting patterns. She expressed surprise over Trump's appeal to Latino men, implying that such demographics would naturally oppose him. But Stephen A., in his straightforward manner, explained that individuals from diverse Hispanic backgrounds think differently based on their cultural and country-specific experiences, like different views from Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, etc. Stephen A. pointed out that it isn't fair to paint a community with one broad brush. There are layers and nuances, you know? He shined a light on how members can have different priorities, whether it's the economy, border control, or other issues entirely. A broader discussion. He also touched upon the challenges faced by many in the Hispanic community and debunked the stereotype that all members of this community would share the same stance on immigration. That's something folks tend to overlook, right? Recognizing diversity within diversity is crucial. And honestly, this conversation does extend beyond just Hispanics. Stephen A. brought it back to the larger concept of individual thought over group assumptions. It's about acknowledging personal experiences that drive political choices. Ending with a statement. Throughout it all, Stephen A. maintained an assertive, balanced demeanor.
You are the left, and you are a prisoner to the extreme left.
You think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party.
That means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Even when touching upon economic concerns, like rising inflation and people's real-world worries about living costs, he remained anchored in the idea that policies need to resonate with people's practical, everyday realities. And that's kind of important, don't you think? When people vote, they think about things that truly impact their lives, not abstract political ideals. And so the day on The View wasn't just about sparking debates, but about revealing the layers under them. Ordinary people's lives and the simple truth that issues are hardly ever black and white.
To recognize is this, and I've said this often. When we look at the economy, I remember when Biden came into the office, he inherited about 1.5% inflation. It ballooned to about 9.1% before it ultimately came down to where it is now, right? That doesn't mean anything to minorities. The percentage of inflation, and here's the percentage. Nah. How much does gas cost? How much does the groceries cost, okay? How much does rent cost? How much does my mortgage cost? That's what folks pay attention to, what's actually in their wallet. I don't know too many minorities that want to trust the system. And so when people speak, although you're right and righteous with your emotion and your righteous indignation, other people are saying we have the right to have righteous indignation when it comes to our pocket, or when it comes to our lifestyle, or when it comes to our environment. If we see crimes in the streets and stuff like that, we see homelessness and it's ballooned. We got a problem with that, and we don't believe this person.
So, guys, this is where we need your thoughts. Do you think Stephen A. broke fresh ground with his arguments, or do you think there's still more to these discussions than what meets the eye? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget, if you liked this breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe for more insightful stories just like this one. Stay tuned, and we'll catch up in the next episode.